The last time you had a drink, whether you were alone or with another, you were having a drink with an androgynous human being. And this is true for the last time you broke bread, or as I have tried to suggest, the last time you made love. There seems to be a vast amount of confusion in the Western world concerning these matters. But love and sexual activity are not synonymous. The American ideal, then, of sexuality appears to be rooted in the American ideal of masculinity. This ideal has created cowboys and Indians, good guys and bad guys, punks and studs, tough guys and softies, butch and faggot, black and white. It is an ideal so paralytically infantile that it is virtually forbidden as an unpatriotic act that the American boy evolve into the complexity of manhood. Once you have discerned the meaning of a label, it may seem to define you for others, but it does not have the power to define you to yourself.
I am a 22-year-old senior at Morehouse College. I'm also a pastor's kid. I'm a creative. I'm a singer, songwriter, producer. I'm actually in the industry right now. It was in elementary school, so around like first, second, third grade. I went to a public school, and I was not like the other black boys, which was normally some type of hyper-masculine, into sports type of person. I was really into music. I still am into music. And, you know, that's not something that should be taboo, but at that time, nobody's trying to go and sing. You know what I mean? It's kind of sort of everybody wants to go play basketball and everything. And that's perfectly fine, but it's just something that I didn't necessarily want to do. So because of that, there was this kind of opinion that I might be less masculine or feminine, or what was called gay at the time. And not to say that that's a bad thing, but it was something that I clearly wasn't. And I was kind of sort of confused as to why they were calling me those things. So I was sort of excluded from guys who looked like me and who were around my age. And it really bugged me because as a kid, you want to be included into different spaces, especially when other black guys are involved. So I endured a lot of bullying, not as extreme as other people, but I did have my own form of bullying. And I was really upset through those 3 years of school. So cut to, I moved to another school at fourth grade, and I was still the same person, but it was at a predominantly white school. I kind of came in with the same idea that those same guys would have the same opinion about me, and it turned out that they did not. And I really found that to be very interesting, how me leaving this predominantly black environment stifled who I was as a boy and going to this predominantly white situation, and they being very open to me. So that kind of started me on that journey of trying to figure out why I felt this way in different environments. And also it kind of put in perspective my relationship with other black men. I didn't really have a lot of friendships with guys my age who were also black, not until I went to Morehouse College, a school with nobody but black men. And during that freshman year, I had time to listen to different conversations, different people, and get different perspectives from people who were in the same situation as I was and who was also on the bullying side. I talked to people who bullied people like me when they were younger and the outlook they have on it now, and talk about the regrets they have about putting people in that situation. And it kind of just started me on this journey of trying to figure out how do we not make it so taboo, and kind of just open it up to people to become free, to be whoever they want to be. Toxic masculinity, I see it as a narrow and very repressive description of manhood, where strength is magnified and where emotions are seen as weakness, also where sex and brutality are like yardsticks by which men are measured, while supposedly, having emotional vulnerability in situations, or simply just not being a hypersexual being, that's seen as being less of a man. Because I really do believe that black men are looking for a way to be these emotional creatures without being seen as something that they're not.
Right.
If nobody is going to be that ear for other black men, I need to step up to the plate and be there for my fellow black men, whether you are straight or gay or trans or queer. I feel like I need to be that person to be that ear, because out of that, most of the time comes healing, and that's what I'm here for.
I have so many thoughts. I'm scribbling so many notes here, so I just want to go through some of them. I definitely hear what you're saying. There was an article that I was reading called Toxic Masculinity by a woman named Jacqueline Friedman, March 13th, 2013, on a website called prospect.org. And there was a quote in here that kind of nailed some things for me. This is a quote from NFL quarterback Don McPherson. And he says, listen to this very closely, brothers and sisters. He says, we don't raise boys to be men. We raise them not to be women or gay men. We don't raise boys to be men. We raise them not to be women or gay men. And I think for many brothers, particularly young boys, the biggest fear that they have of expressing the wide range of their emotions and their manhood is that they will be tagged fag or sissy or gay or homo. That's the big fear. So when you operate from that kind of fear, you automatically limit your range of expression. You check how you walk, you check how you talk, you check how you do a lot of things because you just don't want to be tagged gay. And most fathers raise their sons not to be gay and really don't exhibit anything that might look like you're effeminate in any kind of way. I think that's a big thing to talk about. And outside of sports, men are not taught how to be with other men outside of sports. We're not taught that in a non-sexual way. Now, men are taught how to be with men sexually. We hear those conversations, particularly in a LGBTQ context. I'm talking about how to be with other men in a non-sexual way. Women are taught how to be with other women. That's what a sister circle is all about. That's what a sister friend is all about. Women get together. There was a brother many years ago named Joseph Beam, B-E-A-M, who wrote a book called Brother to Brother. And in that book, I'll never forget this. He wrote that women get together face to face just to be together. Men get together shoulder to shoulder to do things together. And that's true. We get together to play. That's true. We get together shoulder to shoulder. So if I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with you, we're not looking at each other. We're not really relating to each other. We're in solidarity to do something together, but we're not even looking at each other. We're not seeing each other. Women get together face to face. They sit across the table from one another over their favorite beverage, and they look at each other and they feel one another. How to be with a man in a non-sexual context is not something that's taught. When I was in college, there was a brother named Marvin Redd, R-E-D-D. And he was from Baltimore and I was from another part of Maryland. And I remember this was 1984. And we were just sitting there talking. I had just gotten to know him in my first year. And we were just sitting there talking one day. And all of a sudden he put his head in my lap. He was just laying in my lap. And I was so uncomfortable. And even back then, I was pretty evolved in terms of my masculine side and my feminine side. But him with his head in my lap. Now, Marvin was on the basketball team. He was a football player. It wasn't that I was questioning his masculinity in any way. And it's not even that I didn't appreciate it. In fact, I was kind of impressed that he felt that comfortable to just put his head in my lap and lie there while we were talking. But it was the perception of what that would look like to other people that freaked me out. I just couldn't handle it. It made me nervous. What are other people going to say? There was a fear there. And to what do you attribute these ideas holding up in a black space specifically where they might not be held up in a white space? What do you attribute that to in our black community?
That is really interesting. That's a very interesting question. That was something that I had trouble with figuring out because, again, I went from being in an all-black space to going to an all-white space where I was literally one of 3 black people. So I had no choice. But if I wanted to make friends, I needed to make friends with white people. So the conversations that I've had at Morehouse, which I give credit to Morehouse and the students at Morehouse for making me see things that I didn't see. But the conversations that we have within the black community, especially with our fathers and our uncles and our grandfathers, they are very closed-minded most of the time, especially when it comes to this idea of being a man or being the black man in the community. It's very aggressive.
Yes.
Even with black women, luckily, thank God, I didn't have a household like that. My dad very much so gave my mom the space to be a strong woman, and I appreciate him for that. I really do. But in many spaces that I went in with different family members, it was very closed-minded and very aggressive when we were speaking of being a man, because we have to protect this community most of the time from these people, from these white people who would come in and do whatever they want with our communities. And at a certain point in time, we were not having that. So,
well, let me follow up with you. Let me follow up with you and dig a little deeper around specifically what I asked you. My question was, to what do you attribute some of these ideas holding up in a black space where they're not held up in a white space? And you, in addition to introducing yourself as a creative, you also introduced yourself as a PK, a preacher's kid. Right. And so I just want to point in the direction of religion and ask you, do you see that as having a place, as a contributing factor as to why some of these ideas are holding up in a black space where they're not holding up in a white space?
Absolutely. I feel like it's very simple. Within the black church, it's religion anyway. There's this idea that homosexuality is sin, it's a disgrace, and all this type of conversation within religion. And when you put that with black men, it's sort of like the idea that if you are a man, you have to follow these rules. And if you show any signs of femininity, it is leaning towards homosexuality. You don't have to necessarily be homosexual, but if you have these feminine vibes or whatever, you could lean towards that, and that within itself is a sin. So we directly preach against that in the church.
I want to dig right here, brothers, and particularly with the two of you all, because both of your fathers are preachers. And this is no disrespect to them. I respect the role of a preacher in our community. I do want to say this, though, and then ask you a question. I don't see many brothers with these skills, many black male preachers with the skills or enlightenment to preach and teach on how the disciples interacted with Jesus. Because if you look at how those brothers treated Jesus, it was very compassionate, very soft. There was no chest bumping going on there. I mean, they kissed his feet, they washed his hair. I mean, they treated that brother like a king. And I don't hear many brothers preaching on that or teaching on that. They don't share the compassionate aspects of Jesus in the context of how he related to his all-male disciples. And until it starts coming from the pulpit, that is a major way to begin to seed, S-E-E-D, some new ideas and some new thinking into the black church community. Thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree. A lot of influence comes from the pulpit, especially within the black community. And sadly, black pastors don't necessarily have the nuance to speak on those topics, especially when you were talking about the compassionate side of the disciples toward Jesus. I absolutely agree with that, because bias kind of holds them off from that conversation.
Right.
But I do think it's something that needs to be talked about within that space. I definitely agree with what you just said.
There are brothers out here who have balanced manhood. They know how to be strong when it requires to be strong, and they know how to be soft and embrace their woman when it's time to embrace her and hug her and say nothing. The balance is what you want. You don't want all or nothing. You want it both. And brothers haven't learned how to create that balance for themselves.
Right. So when I say the three-dimensional range of emotions, it's very simple as knowing which emotion to draw from in certain situations. For the most part, we know how to channel anger very well, which is why we are seen as this aggressive type. But I really don't buy into that facade. I don't think we come we don't come into the earth being these aggressive creatures.
Exactly.
We feel different things. We're happy in certain situations. We are giddy in certain situations. We're sad and we're crying in certain situations. And I feel like that hasn't been publicized enough to where black men feel comfortable enough to express all of these emotions in different situations. These conversations should be had, especially if you're a father. This conversation should be had with your son. It should be had with your nephews and grandsons. It's something that should be talked about more, because I think that it's the next part in our evolution as black men.
Yes.
That we can have these wide range of emotions at any given time, especially as a black man. And I want us to be able to be liberated to feel and be liberated to be exactly who we are without any judgment or without any standards that people can't seem to uphold. I want us to definitely start the conversation and see where it goes. Open up your mind, especially if you're of the older generation and don't necessarily agree with some of the things I'm saying. Listen to some of the younger generations. Have this conversation, because it's absolutely necessary.
When do boys cry? And how do boys cry? That's what I want to talk about. And I want to talk about how do we teach those around us to be with us when we are demonstrating a wide range of emotions, because that might freak some people out. You know, I'm using the male-female dynamic. If I cry, and I've cried here several times in this space, that might freak my female co-hosts out if I do that. So I gotta teach them how to be with me when I'm showing my tears. I gotta teach them that. They're not just gonna show up knowing how to be with me. Now, the sisters I have here with me are very gentle and kind and compassionate with me, and they understand me, and they allow that space without trying to jump in and mother me, which as a man does not work. Right. Don't mother a man when he's crying.
Absolutely.
That don't work. Hold the space for me and with me, but don't rush into mother me, because that's emasculating. And these sisters that I'm with today do not do that. They let me be me. They let me know they've got my back in those moments, and they just let the space breathe. But not every sister is going to know how to handle that space.